January 17, 1944. Allied soldiers stare up at Monte Cassino, a 1,700-foot mountain dominating the Liris Valley in central Italy. Atop the summit sits the Abbey of Monte Cassino, a 1,400-year-old Benedictine monastery, its white walls gleaming against the winter sky. Between the soldiers and Rome, just 80 miles northwest, stands this mountain, this abbey, and the German Gustav Line, the most formidable defensive position in Western Europe. The terrain is a defender's paradise, an attacker's nightmare. Steep rocky slopes, narrow valleys, fast-flowing rivers, mountains crowned with German observation posts commanding every approach. Winter rains have turned the lowlands into swamps. The cold cuts through uniforms. Soldiers huddle in foxholes filling with water. And everywhere, German guns wait. Artillery, mortars, machine guns positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that turn every advance into a slaughter. Over the next 4 months, soldiers from a dozen nations will assault Monte Cassino in 4 separate offensives. Americans, British, New Zealanders, Indians, Poles, French colonial troops, Canadians, all will hurl themselves at the mountain. The Germans will hold. The Abbey will be destroyed in one of the war's most controversial bombing raids. The Rapido River will run red with blood. Cassino town will be pulverized into moonscape. The mountain will consume divisions whole. By the battle's end, 55,000 Allied casualties and 20,000 German casualties will testify to Monte Cassino's terrible cost. The battle will demonstrate the limits of Allied firepower, the skill of German defensive warfare, and the incredible resilience of soldiers fighting in conditions that seemed designed to destroy the human spirit. This is the story of the mountain that wouldn't fall. 4 months of hell in the Italian winter and spring of 1944. The Allied invasion of Italy began in September 1943 with landings at Salerno. Italy's surrender that same month created an illusion that the campaign would be brief. The illusion shattered against German resistance. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commanding German forces in Italy, conducted a masterful fighting withdrawal up the Italian peninsula, making the Allies pay for every mile. By January 1944, Allied forces had advanced 70 miles from Salerno. Rome lay just 80 miles ahead, but between the Allies and the Italian capital stood the Gustav Line, a defensive belt stretching across Italy from the Tyrrhenian Sea to the Adriatic. The line's anchor point was Monte Cassino, dominating Highway 6, the Liris Valley route to Rome, the only practical path for Allied armor. The Allied strategy was straightforward: break through at Cassino, advance up the Liris Valley to Rome, draw German divisions away from France, where D-Day was planned for June, and potentially knock Italy out of the war entirely. General Harold Alexander commanded Allied forces in Italy. Under him, General Mark Clark's U.S. Fifth Army held the western sector, while General Bernard Montgomery's, later General Oliver Lee's, British Eighth Army held the east. The German defensive position was formidable. Kesselring had fortified the Gustav Line with concrete bunkers, minefields, barbed wire, and artillery positions. The terrain provided natural advantages: rivers, mountains, and narrow valleys that channeled attacks into killing zones. Most critically, Monte Cassino's height provided observation over the entire battlefield. German spotters could direct artillery fire onto any Allied movement with devastating accuracy. The monastery atop Monte Cassino complicated everything. Founded in 529 AD by Saint Benedict, the Abbey was one of Catholicism's most sacred sites. It housed priceless manuscripts, artwork, and religious treasures. Both sides initially respected its sanctity. The Germans declared they wouldn't occupy it. The Allies pledged not to bomb it. But the Abbey's commanding position made it militarily invaluable. The question of whether Germans actually occupied the monastery would become one of the campaign's most controversial issues. The first assault on Monte Cassino began January 17, 1944. General Mark Clark ordered the U.S. II Corps to attack across the Rapido River and advance toward the Liris Valley. Simultaneously, the British X-Corps would attack along the coast toward the Garigliano River. The French Expeditionary Corps under General Alphonse-Juin would attack through the mountains north of Cassino. The Rapido River crossing became one of the American Army's worst disasters. The 36th Infantry Division, primarily composed of Texas National Guardsmen, received orders to cross the Rapido at night, establish a bridgehead, and push toward the Liris Valley. The division's commander, Major General Fred Walker, protested the plan as suicidal. He was overruled. On the night of January 2021, the 36th Division attempted the crossing. The Germans had turned the Rapido's approaches into a death trap. Minefields covered the banks. Artillery and mortars were pre-registered on likely crossing points. Machine guns commanded every approach. The assault boats, carried forward by soldiers struggling through mud, were too heavy and unwieldy. Many sank immediately. Others capsized in the swift current. German fire swept the river, killing men in the water or pinning survivors on the far bank. The division made it across in small groups but couldn't establish a viable bridgehead. German counterattacks drove them back. Engineers trying to build bridges came under withering fire. By January 22, the assault had failed completely. The 36th Division suffered over 2,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing, in 2 days, for no gain whatsoever. The disaster would haunt the division and Clark for years. Post-war, the Texas legislature held hearing on the needless sacrifice of Texas boys. Meanwhile, the British X-Corps made better initial progress crossing the Garigliano but couldn't break through German defenses. The French Expeditionary Corps, including Moroccan and Algerian troops accustomed to mountain warfare, achieved surprising success in the mountains north of Cassino. They penetrated German lines and advanced several miles, threatening to outflank the Gustav Line. But without support, committed elsewhere, they couldn't exploit their gains. On January 22, the Anzio landing occurred, an amphibious assault behind German lines designed to threaten Rome and force German withdrawal from the Gustav Line. Instead, the Anzio force, under Major General John Lucas, dug in rather than advancing. The Germans contained the beachhead. Rather than relieving pressure on Cassino, Anzio required reinforcement, draining Allied resources. By February 11, the first battle of Monte Cassino had failed. Allied casualties exceeded 14,000. German defenses held intact. The Abbey remained standing, though increasingly, Allied commanders believed Germans were using it for observation, despite German denials. Frustration with the stalemate led to one of the war's most controversial decisions, bombing the monastery. General Bernard Freyberg, commanding the New Zealand Corps preparing for the second assault, insisted the Germans occupied the Abbey and that it had to be destroyed. Intelligence was ambiguous. Aerial reconnaissance showed no definite evidence of German occupation, but the Abbey's position made it seem impossible the Germans weren't using it. On February 15, 1944, 229 Allied bombers dropped 1,150 tons of bombs on the Abbey of Monte Cassino. The bombardment reduced the 1,400-year-old monastery to rubble. Bombs killed approximately 230 Italian civilians sheltering in the Abbey, refugees who had sought sanctuary in what they believed was protected ground. Several monks died as well, though Abbot Gregorio Diamer survived. The bombing achieved nothing militarily and made the Allied task harder. Before the bombing, German paratroopers of the 1st Parachute Division respected the Abbey's neutrality and didn't occupy it. After the bombing, seeing the Abbey destroyed, they immediately occupied the ruins. The rubble provided better defensive positions than the intact structure. What had been neutral ground became a fortress. The bombing also handed Germany a propaganda victory. Axis media portrayed the Allies as destroyers of Western civilization, barbarians bombing sacred Christian sites. The Catholic Church condemned the action. Artistic and cultural losses were incalculable, though German military authorities had evacuated many treasures to the Vatican beforehand. much remained and was lost forever. The decision to bomb remains debated. Freyberg insisted it was militarily necessary. General Harold Alexander, the theater commander, authorized it. Critics argue better intelligence would have shown the Abbey wasn't occupied, and bombing strengthened rather than weakened German defenses. The episode demonstrates the fog of war, commanders making irreversible decisions based on incomplete information. Hours after the bombing, the New Zealand Corps attacked. The plan called for the 4th Indian Division to assault Monastery Hill, the heights below the Abbey, while New Zealand infantry attacked Cassino town. Both attacks failed catastrophically. The Indian assault on Monastery Hill was slaughter. German paratroopers, elite troops among the Wehrmacht's best, defended from carefully prepared positions. They had observed Allied preparations and anticipated attack routes. Indian soldiers advanced uphill under withering fire. Some units reached positions near the monastery ruins but couldn't hold. German counterattacks drove them back. Casualties were appalling. Entire battalions shattered. In Cassino town, New Zealand infantry advanced into a moonscape. Allied artillery had pounded the town for days, reducing buildings to rubble. The destruction helped defenders. Germans created strongpoints in cellars and rubble piles, positions nearly immune to artillery and difficult to locate. New Zealand soldiers fought building by building, room by room, only to be driven back by counterattacks. The fighting was savage. Grenades, submachine guns, sometimes knives and fists. Weather compounded the misery. Winter rains continued. Rivers flooded. Foxholes became pools. Soldiers suffered from exposure. Trench foot disabled thousands. Supplies had to be carried forward on narrow mountain tracks, often under fire. Evacuating the wounded was agonizing, stretcher bearers struggling down steep paths while German artillery sought them out. By February 18, the second battle ended. Allied casualties exceeded 4,000, with the Indian Division losing over 3,000 men, more than half its infantry strength. German paratroopers held. The monastery remained in German hands. The Allied advance had gained perhaps a few hundred yards at catastrophic cost. The third battle began with an unprecedented bombardment. On March 15, 1944, Allied commanders decided if firepower alone couldn't break German defenses, then more firepower must be applied. At 8:30 hours, 775 aircraft dropped 1,250 tons of bombs on Cassino town and German positions. Following the aerial bombardment, Allied artillery, 750 guns, pounded the town for 4 more hours. Over 3,000 tons of explosives fell on an area barely a square mile. The bombardment was apocalyptic. Cassino town ceased to exist as anything recognizable. Buildings were pulverized to dust and rubble. Craters overlapped. The landscape resembled the moon. Soldiers who witnessed it believed nothing could survive. Surely the Germans were dead or driven mad. They were wrong. German paratroopers, dug deep in cellars and bunkers, survived. The bombardment killed some, buried others, but many survived intact. More critically, the bombardment made the Allied task harder. The rubble blocked roads and streets. Tanks couldn't maneuver through the debris. Infantry had to clamber over unstable ruins while German defenders fired from cellars and bunkers. The New Zealand 2nd Division attacked into the rubble. They fought forward yard by yard, crater by crater, rubble pile by rubble pile. German resistance was fanatical. Paratroopers held cellars for days against repeated attacks. The Gurkhas, Nepalese soldiers serving with the British Indian Army, launched repeated assaults on Hangman's Hill, a key position overlooking the town. They suffered massive casualties but gained little ground. The fighting was primordial. Visibility was measured in feet. Soldiers couldn't see more than the next pile of rubble. Battle became a series of isolated small unit actions, squads fighting squads, sometimes hand-to-hand. Communication collapsed. Units became disoriented in the moonscape. Supporting the attack became nearly impossible. Forward observers couldn't see targets. Artillery fell on friend and foe alike. After a week of hellish fighting, Allied forces held perhaps half of Cassino town but couldn't advance further. Casualties exceeded 2,000. German losses were also severe, but the paratroopers held. On March 23, the offensive was called off. The Third Battle of Monte Cassino ended in stalemate, the mountain still unconquered. April 1944 brought operational pause. Both sides were exhausted. The Allies needed time to reorganize, rest shattered divisions, and plan a new approach. The Germans needed to rebuild defenses and replace casualties. Weather remained terrible. Rain continued through early April. The battlefield became a landscape of mud, craters, rubble, and death. The conditions soldiers endured were horrific. Both sides lived in holes in the ground, often filled with water. Trench foot and other cold weather injuries hospitalized thousands. Dysentery and other diseases spread through crowded, unsanitary positions. Hot food was rare. Resupply was dangerous. Every movement drew fire. Men went days without sleep. Shell shock, what we now call PTSD, was epidemic. Soldiers who broke mentally were evacuated in droves. The smell was overwhelming. Thousands of bodies, Allied and German, lay unburied or partially buried across the battlefield. The spring warmth made the stench unbearable. Informal truces allowed both sides to recover bodies, but the killing restarted immediately after. Soldiers learned to live with the smell of death, sleeping yards from rotting corpses. During this pause, Allied commanders completely reorganized their approach. General Alexander developed Operation Diadem, a coordinated offensive involving the entire Italian front. Rather than attacking Cassino in isolation, multiple corps would attack simultaneously, stretching German defenses to breaking point. The Polish II Corps under General W. Ladislaw Anders would assault Monte Cassino itself. The British XIII Corps would cross the Rapido and advance up the Liri Valley. The French Expeditionary Corps would attack through the mountains. The U.S. II Corps would attack along the coast. Even the Anzio beachhead would break out. Overwhelming force applied everywhere at once. On the night of May 11, 1944, the final battle began. At 2300 hours, over 1,600 Allied guns opened fire simultaneously along a 20-mile front. The barrage was shattering. The ground shook. The sky lit with muzzle flashes. The noise was physically painful. For 40 minutes, Allied artillery pounded German positions with unprecedented intensity. Then the infantry advanced. The Polish II Corps attacked Monte Cassino directly. These were soldiers with deep motivation. Poland had been conquered and occupied. Many had families in German or Soviet captivity or worse. They were fighting for their homeland's liberation and for revenge. They attacked with extraordinary courage and suffered appalling casualties. The first Polish assault on May 12 was repulsed with heavy losses. German paratroopers, though battered by the bombardment, fought with their characteristic skill and determination. The Poles withdrew, regrouped, and attacked again. For days, Polish infantry assaulted Monastery Hill, taking horrific casualties but refusing to quit. German resistance gradually weakened. Ammunition ran low. Casualties mounted. Reinforcement became impossible. Meanwhile, the British XIII Corps successfully crossed the Rapido River, this time with proper preparation, engineer support, and overwhelming firepower. They established bridgeheads and began advancing up the Liri Valley. The French Expeditionary Corps achieved a stunning breakthrough in the mountains, advancing rapidly through terrain the Germans thought impassable. American forces pushed forward along the coast. The German line was cracking. Kesselring faced impossible decisions. His divisions were stretched to breaking. The French breakthrough threatened to outflank the entire Gustav Line. Reinforcements were needed everywhere simultaneously. By May 17, maintaining the Gustav Line became impossible. Kesselring ordered withdrawal. German forces would conduct a fighting retreat to the next defensive position, the Hitler Line, several miles north. On the morning of May 18, 1944, Polish soldiers of the 12th Podolsky Lancers Regiment climbed the final slopes to the monastery ruins. They found it abandoned. Germans had withdrawn during the night. At 10:20 hours, soldiers raised a Polish flag over the ruins of Monte Cassino. A trumpeter played the Polish cavalry's traditional signal. After 4 months, 55,000 Allied casualties and 4 separate offensives, Monte Cassino had fallen. But the victory was hollow for many. The Poles had suffered over 4,000 casualties, nearly half their force, in just 7 days. They had taken a mountain of rubble that the Germans had already abandoned. The strategic objective was achieved. The road to Rome was open, but the cost haunted survivors. The Polish cemetery at Monte Cassino holds over 1,000 graves, silent testimony to the price paid for a mountain. The Battle of Monte Cassino's casualty figures tell a story of sustained, brutal attrition. Allied forces suffered approximately 55,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, over 4 months. The breakdown by nationality reveals the international nature of the campaign. American forces, -20,000 casualties, primarily in the first battle's Rapido River crossing and subsequent operations. British and Commonwealth forces, -16,000 casualties, including New Zealand, Indian, Canadian, and South African units. Polish forces, -4,000 casualties, concentrated in the final week of fighting. French colonial forces, -7,000 casualties among Moroccan, Algerian, and other units. Other Allied forces, casualties among various units. German casualties totaled approximately 20,000 killed, wounded, captured, primarily among the elite 1st Parachute Division and 90th Panzergrenadier Division. These units, defending for 4 months against vastly superior numbers, demonstrated the terrible effectiveness of well-prepared defensive positions held by skilled, determined troops. Civilian casualties remain uncertain but certainly exceeded 2,000. The February 15 bombing killed approximately 230 civilians in the Abbey. Countless others died in Cassino town and surrounding villages, caught in bombardments, killed in crossfire, or dying from starvation, disease, and exposure. The Italian population, caught between warring armies, paid a terrible price. The physical destruction was staggering. Cassino town was obliterated. Photographs show total devastation, not a single intact structure. The Abbey was reduced to rubble. The surrounding landscape was moonscape, cratered, scarred, poisoned. Reconstruction would take years. Even today, unexploded ordnance from the battle is occasionally discovered. The strategic results of Monte Cassino are debated. Operationally, the battle achieved its objective, breaking the Gustav Line, opening the road to Rome, and allowing Allied forces to advance. Rome fell on June 4, 1944, 2 days before D-Day. The Italian campaign continued north, tying down German divisions that might otherwise have been deployed to France or the Eastern Front. However, critics argue the cost exceeded the gain. 4 months, 55,000 casualties, for an advance of perhaps 50 miles, an exchange rate suggesting attrition warfare, not mobile operations. The campaign drew Allied resources that might have been better used elsewhere. 20 Allied divisions were tied down in Italy, fighting for terrain that was strategically secondary to France or the Eastern Front. The impact on the Normandy invasion remains debated. Allied commanders argued that Italy tied down 25 German divisions that couldn't be deployed to France. Critics counter that those German divisions were tied down because Allied forces were there. Had the Allies not invaded Italy, German forces wouldn't have been there either. The question becomes whether the Italian campaign was worth its cost relative to alternative strategies. Beyond statistics, Monte Cassino represented human experiences of extraordinary intensity. Soldiers on both sides endured conditions that pushed human endurance to its limits. Allied soldiers advanced uphill against prepared defenses, taking casualties with every step. German paratroopers defended against impossible odds, knowing relief wasn't coming, fighting because they were soldiers, and that was their job. The multinational nature of Allied forces created both strength and friction. American, British, Polish, French colonial, Indian, New Zealand, and other forces fought side by side, but sometimes with different methods, priorities, and national interests. Command relationships were complex. Competition for resources and glory existed alongside cooperation. Polish soldiers fought with particular intensity. For them, Monte Cassino was more than a tactical objective. It was a symbol of Polish resistance, proof that Poland still fought despite occupation. Their courage was extraordinary, their casualties catastrophic. The cemetery at Monte Cassino became sacred ground for Poles, a place of pilgrimage where the nation honors its soldiers. German paratroopers earned grudging respect from their enemies. They held impossible positions against overwhelming numbers and firepower. Their defensive skill was remarkable. Even after the war, veterans from both sides acknowledged the German paratroopers' professionalism, courage, and tenacity. This doesn't excuse Nazi Germany's crimes, but recognizes that individual soldiers often demonstrated military virtues even while serving an evil regime. The wounded suffered terribly. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Evacuating casualties from the mountain under fire was agonizing. Men with severe wounds lay for hours, sometimes days, before reaching hospitals. Morphine ran short. Surgeons worked until they collapsed. Hospitals filled beyond capacity. Many wounded who might have survived with better care died from shock, infection, or complications. The destruction of the Abbey remains one of World War II's most controversial decisions. Arguments for and against bombing continue. Arguments for bombing. Allied commanders believed Germans occupied the Abbey and used it for observation. The Abbey's commanding position made it militarily critical. Bombing was intended to save Allied lives by eliminating a German strongpoint. Soldiers' lives take precedence over buildings, even sacred ones. Arguments against bombing. Intelligence didn't confirm German occupation because initially there wasn't any. The bombing didn't provide military advantage. Germans occupied the ruins afterward, creating stronger positions. Cultural and religious heritage was destroyed unnecessarily. Better intelligence and patience might have found alternatives. The consensus among historians is that bombing was a mistake, militarily counterproductive and morally questionable. However, it's easy to judge with hindsight. Commanders faced crushing pressure to break through, watching their soldiers die in waves against seemingly impregnable defenses. The Abbey appeared to be the key. The decision, though wrong, reflected the agonizing choices commanders face in war. Monte Cassino demonstrated several military lessons. First, prepared defensive positions in favorable terrain can withstand incredible punishment if held by skilled, determined troops. German paratroopers showed that quality can offset quantity, at least temporarily. Second, firepower alone doesn't guarantee success. The March bombardment proved that dropping thousands of tons of explosives doesn't automatically break defenders. Third, combined arms coordination and broad front offensives, Operation Diadem, succeed where narrow attacks fail. The battle also revealed the limits of Allied operational art in 1944. Despite material superiority, Allied forces struggled to break through well-defended positions. Tactics were often blunt, massed artillery and infantry assault. Casualties were accepted as necessary costs. The learning curve from North Africa and Sicily to Italy and eventually Normandy was steep and bloody. For Poland, Monte Cassino became a symbol of national resistance. The Polish cemetery at Cassino, with 1,072 graves, remains a pilgrimage site. The battle proved Polish soldiers would fight courageously for their occupied homeland. Post-war, Communist Poland couldn't fully commemorate the battle. These soldiers had fought for the Polish government in exile in London, not the communist regime. Only after 1989 could Poland properly honor its Monte Cassino veterans. The Battle of Monte Cassino stands as one of World War II's most brutal struggles. 4 months of sustained combat, 55,000 Allied and 20,000 German casualties, an abbey destroyed, a town obliterated, for an advance measured in miles. The battle demonstrated warfare's terrible cost when attacking prepared defenses in favorable terrain. We remember Monte Cassino for multiple reasons. We honor the courage of soldiers from a dozen nations who fought with extraordinary bravery in appalling conditions. We acknowledge the skill of German paratroopers who held against overwhelming odds. We mourn the civilians who died and the cultural treasures lost. We debate the decisions, particularly the Abbey's destruction, that remain controversial. Monte Cassino reminds us that even in war's final years, when the Allies possessed overwhelming material superiority, victory required blood, courage, and sacrifice. The mountain demanded a terrible price from all who fought there. The Polish flag flying over the Abbey's ruins in May 1944 symbolized not just military victory but human endurance. The capacity of soldiers to fight on when everything screamed for surrender, when casualties mounted beyond bearing, when the objective seemed forever out of reach. The monastery has been rebuilt, reconstructed exactly as it was before the bombing. It stands again atop Monte Cassino, a symbol of resilience and renewal. But in the cemeteries surrounding the mountain, Polish, British, Commonwealth, German, lie thousands who died taking or defending it. Their graves remind us that the mountain that wouldn't fall eventually did, but only after exacting one of the Second World War's most terrible costs. Monte Cassino fell, but the price haunts us still.